Now, Richard, I get the impression that to do any kind of theology, whether it be more academic or more life-oriented, that you just have to be smart. A lot of people think, well, that just leaves me out because I just can't do it. How do we help those kind of people?
Well, it's sad that that's the impression people get, because it is the impression people get, honestly. That many times people who study theology, and with the way that we're doing it here in this curriculum, they often get the impression if they can't use $50 words, or they can't use 6-syllable words and quote Latin phrases and things like that, that they're not going to be able to get true theology. Mm-hmm. And there's just nothing that could be further from the truth than that. In fact, I guess what I would want to say to a person that raised that question is this. First, don't be impressed. Don't be impressed by people who use big words and who quote Latin phrases and things like that, because often that's just a facade that's hiding a great deal of insecurity, and that people learn how to use and to play this theological game among academics. And typically, academic theologians have one audience and one audience in mind, and that is other academics. And they want to practice, and they want to be respected within their peer community, and so they work according to certain genres, and they work according to certain standards of living and of speaking and of handling materials. And that's simply not the case. I mean, I'm sure that the Apostle Peter was a very gifted theologian, but he was terribly uneducated. Now, we'd have to say that the Apostle Paul, on the other hand, was highly educated, okay? So there's nothing wrong with being intellectual. But notice how the Apostle Paul is, as Peter had to admit it, as he wrote in his epistles, that some things that Paul says are very hard to understand. Well, that's the illustration there, you see. Here's poor Peter sitting over here going, well, oh, look at me, I'm no academician, but Paul was a great rabbi, trained up in the great schools of Jerusalem, so, who am I? But that's not what he did. Instead, when he had his epistles written, he said, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, just like Paul did, because he had authority and he was understanding the truth too. So Christian theology is for people of all kinds of different backgrounds. And some of it can be more academic and some of it can be non-academic. But what I have found is that those that tend to succeed in more formal theology with that academic background often tend to be inadequate. And they're unable to do theology well. They may sound as if they're doing it well, but they're not. And the way you can tell that is by looking to see what kind of fruit their theology produces in their lives as well in the lives of people that follow them. Because sometimes academic theologians are protected from view. They're not put in fish bowls. And so you sort of don't know the dark side of a professional theologian. And so they seem so impressive. They're saying the right things, and they're saying it so well, and they're saying it so forcefully, and those kinds of things. If you knew their lives, you might not be so impressed. But if you can't see the fruit in their lives because they're sort of kept away off in the academic closet, then look at the lives of the people that follow their teachings. And what I think you often find is that some of what we would call the best theologians, the followers of some of the best theologians, are just flat out hard to live with. And their lives are not full of joy. You don't find the fruit of Holy Spirit in their lives. You don't find them serving people. Instead, what you find is they're taking what I put in quotes, good theology, and being terrible people. But the reality is that good theology produces good people. And so when you find so-called good theology turning out bad people consistently, there are always exceptions, but consistently, if it happens consistently, then you need to question whether or not that theology is really good. Yeah. I mean, maybe there's something messed up about this. I can give you an example. In my own branch of the church, there's a lot of talk about the need to focus on God. And this is in reaction to humanism, so we sort of understand that. We need to be theocentric, and we need to exalt God up and make Him bigger and higher and help people to understand how great He is and those kinds of things, none of which is wrong. That's absolutely true. And if you think that humanity is on top of the heap, well, then you need to understand God is on top of the heap, not humanity. But what often comes with that is this exaltation of God in a way that the Bible doesn't exalt God, by denigrating people. You see, the Bible does not denigrate the image of God to exalt God. Now, it denigrates sinners, no doubt about that, especially vile sinners, but it does not denigrate people in order to exalt God. But what you often find is academic theologians sort of, again, painting themselves into a corner here. To exalt God, we have to denigrate and ignore and not think about and not honor people. And so what do you find? What kind of people do you find them to be? Unloving, uncaring, unthoughtful, not servants, but rather boisterous and prevailing and pushy and those kinds of things, and uncaring about their neighbors and those sorts of things. And so that's not good theology gone bad in practice. That's bad theology, because the Bible tells us that you exalt God by properly exalting people. Or to put it the way Jesus put it is, you can't love God without loving people. They go hand in hand. They're a photo finish. Now, loving people is second place to loving God, but they're a photo finish. And that's why often I'll tell people things like these. I'll say, proper theocentrism without anthropocentrism is not proper theism at all. So to be theocentric in a way that's not also human-centric, second place, but nevertheless centered, is not to be properly theocentric. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And when you find then that theologians are hailed as being great theologians because of their ability to communicate, or they write lots of books, or they have all these great, deep, heavy thoughts, and yet you see their lives or the lives of their students not bringing forth the fruit of love for people, then it's not misapplication. It's bad theology to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I can even think of, having studied theology for a while now, even talking with people who would classify themselves as not as smart, say, that they sometimes just have this depth of insight that sometimes I don't even have, because I focus so much on the books that intuition that we've talked about, Holy Spirit leading, has given them almost a greater understanding of who God is than I have.
Absolutely. I mean, it's always true. I mean, I found this to be so true that when you go out into the church and you find people who are godly, who are living holy lives, especially older people, they often have better insights into the Bible than the academically trained young person. Now, they may not have the big words to stick on it. They may not have the $50 tags to put on it. They may not be very articulate about it, but they sort of sit there very quietly and then every once in a while open their mouths and say something that calms the whole room, straightens everything out. And it's really the ones that are all wrapped up in the academic that have entered into the artifice. They've entered into this artificial world that they think is the real world, but it's not. I mean, this is why medical internships are so important. I mean, it's one thing to study the books of medicine. It's another thing to practice medicine. And you know how when the fables of medical school, where as soon as doctors begin to study different diseases, they suddenly get all those diseases, because their world is so oriented toward the books that they're studying, the data that they're studying, that they can't look at real life again. They're afraid to touch door handles. Every time they have a pain in their back, they think they're having cancer, or every time they have a chest pain, they think it's a heart attack or a brain aneurysm or something. And the fact is, maybe they are having a brain aneurysm, but probably not at the numbers that they think they are, And that's and so you realize that this paranoid medical student is actually not in reality. That's the point. They've got all this information and they can't juggle the information well enough with real life. They can't bring it to bear yet. And life has not influenced them enough yet to sort of calm them down about these things. So they go sort of crazy about the data that they have. Well, theologians do the same thing, especially young ones. They do exactly the same thing. They get all these patterns of thought and they start working on them and they start looking around themselves and overanalyzing life. Thinking that they can figure out what's actually out there from the book out. But the fact is that just like a doctor goes into practice and takes years to figure out, somebody comes with a headache, you give them an aspirin. That's what you do. You don't go do an MRI on their head unless it's a serious headache and it's gone on for quite a while and the aspirin doesn't take care of it. Go figure, okay? And the same kind of thing is true with theologians. We want to pull out the MRI machine and start opening skulls up and things like that on the basis of a couple of years of study in a school. And that's seriously dangerous. So I think we have to be very clear that just because a person can make good grades in a school, just because they can memorize a lot of data, doesn't make them good theologians. In fact, people often who can't memorize or articulate lots of data are the better theologians.